Hi there, and thanks for joining us for our series on emerging trends and analyzing the financial impact of those trends on future performance for companies. This presentation is going to be talking specifically about cybersecurity. We're going to discuss the financial performance ramifications of cybersecurity issues and discuss ways that companies and lenders can evaluate the risk. So first, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the world of cybersecurity right now. The former CEO of Cisco Systems did an interview with Yahoo Finance, and he said that he expected that US companies were going to experience over 65,000 ransomware attacks in 2021. And he said that number was conservative. He really estimated that that number could be as high as $100,000 and that the average company experienced a cost of $170,000. Some of the larger attacks that we have seen in this year have been in the millions of dollars. We all remember the Colonial Pipeline hack, and we remember the JBS situation. Those two companies alone paid a combined ransom of $15 million. Now, the Department of Justice was able to recover $2.3 million in cryptocurrency, but that $15 million ransom and that $12.7 million net outflow, that's an astronomical number. And the impacts of that kind of a cyber attack are very far reaching. And they didn't end, the attacks didn't end there. We don't always hear about all of the attacks in the news, but we do hear very frequently about the next round of attacks. For example, on September 21st, it was announced that there was a $5.9 million ransomware attack on a farming co-op in Iowa. And what's interesting about this attack is that the hackers, which are believed to be Russian-based, the hackers were able to get into the co-op's data, into new cooperatives' data, and were able to extract information about the various cooperative members. And that gives the hacker an avenue to go after the farm co-op members as well as the co-op itself. Additionally, the hackers threatened to release the source code for a proprietary soil mapping software program that this cooperative had developed. So as you can see, in addition to the dollars, there are a lot of other impacts on the business that we need to be aware of when we're thinking about risk management on the cybersecurity front. You know, there are two types of companies, right? Those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. You say that a little bit in jest, but I'm not sure how much. When you think about what you receive in your inbox on a regular basis on your devices, you know, it is not difficult to believe that every company has been subjected to at least some hacking attempt. So how big is the problem? Ransomware is projected to reach $20 billion in 2021. And the small to middle-sized businesses are the businesses that are at significant risk. Why? Well, it's because those small to mid-sized businesses typically have fewer security measures in place, and they are therefore easier, more profitable targets for hackers. Let's talk about how a cyber attack typically starts. For many of these businesses and many of these ransomware attacks, they begin when someone clicks on a phishing email or downloads an email attachment. And the perpetrators of these attacks are becoming more and more creative. And I wanted to show you an example of a screen print from my own iPhone where I have received an email that looks like it's from something from Focus about a scam that I should be looking at. And if I'm not careful and I'm not alert, I could accidentally click on that attachment, and goodness only knows what I might be unleashing in terms of a ransomware attack. In the past 2 weeks, I've received emails that are supposedly from the IRS, from a company network server, from a Focus network server, from a Focus telephone system, from Microsoft Outlook, from Apple, and from other companies with important sounding names, all with files attached, asking me to click and review and download. I'm giving you another example of a printout of an email, not from my phone, this time from my laptop, because it's sometimes easier when you're looking at your laptop to see what the source of the email is. So in this case, even though the email says that it's from Focus MG via Xerox eScanner fax service, when you look at it, there's actually a name and an email address that isn't at all related to Focus or to even a correctly or incorrectly spelled Xerox. The reason I wanted to show you these examples is because I hope they drive home how important each employee's diligence is when it comes to maintaining a company's records, keeping the company's information safe and secure. If I'm looking at my phone or my iPad or my laptop, and if I'm distracted, and if I accidentally click on something, I could unleash an attack that I don't mean to. But once I've done it, it's done, unfortunately. So what happens once someone clicks on this kind of an email and attachment? Typically, there'll be either a lockout of devices, or the user's data could be encrypted, or confidential customer information could be stolen. And the perpetrator of the attack demands funds, typically in cryptocurrency, to unlock devices or remove encryption, or to promise not to release customer data or further go after the customers of the company that was attacked. Let's think about how widespread this is. Small businesses are estimated to be the targets of 71% of ransomware attacks. Some sectors of the economy that you have to be more concerned about are finance, healthcare, and online retail. When you talk to senior executives and you survey them, 7 out of 10 businesses that were hit by a cyber attack paid a ransom to recover their data. 7 out of 10. And why does that matter? What does, pay a ransom, what difference does it make? Well, it makes a big difference. The National Cybersecurity Alliance has estimated that 60% of small businesses fail within 6 months of an attack, 60%. And for companies that do survive, a Boston-based cybersecurity firm called CyberReason, they estimate that 80% of victims are hit a second time. When I read these numbers the first time, I was astounded. So how do we evaluate and minimize risk? How does a company and how does the company's lender evaluate the risk of this kind of an attack? So let's address a few things. First, it's about risk management. No system is completely foolproof, but we have to manage the risk. One of the ways you manage the risk is you evaluate cost versus benefit for cyber attacks compared to insurance and systems and procedures. Risk management is about managing the risk and the cost. And that's what businesses have to do today. When you're thinking about managing risk, it has to include cybersecurity. So when you're thinking about a company and its approach to risk management, there are a couple of areas that you would want to address and make sure that you understand what the company's approach is. The first one is the company's IT security policy. The second one is disaster recovery planning. The third is system backups. And the fourth item is insurance. We're going to spend a few minutes on each of these topics to help you develop questions that you're going to be able to use with companies as you evaluate their risk. Again, it is impossible to completely reduce the risk of cyber attacks. But if we can stitch together a combination of a security policy, recovery planning, backups, and insurance, we can reduce the financial and operating risk for a company. We need to remember that the cyber attack impacts go well beyond what that ransom is. Current and future business, it can be negatively impacted. So first, let's talk about the IT security policy. What this policy does is identifies the rules and the procedures for all the individuals that are accessing and using the company's IT assets and resources. It's going to address things like bring your own device, password reset policies, different items like that. The purpose of the policy is to create the company's overall approach to information security. So if you were reviewing a company's IT security policy, you'd want to make sure that you understand how it thinks about the audience that the policy applies to and the objectives. Maybe the policy talks about objectives like confidentiality, integrity, availability of needed systems. The policy should also identify who has the authority and who can access the control policy for the IT security. You want to know which senior manager or who it is that's in charge of the data and how the data can be shared and what the network security policies are. Additionally, an IT security policy will oftentimes separate data into different categories: top secret, secret, confidential, and public. If you think of a company in the healthcare sector, they probably have patient names. They have a lot of very personal and private information. You want to understand, are they considering that top secret, secret, confidential? And you want to understand what those terms mean to that specific company. You'll also want to think about looking at the policy in terms of the data protection regulations and the practices and the movement of data, such as encryption. And most lenders are well aware of data encryption. They have to use that when they're sending emails with confidential information all the time. But you also need to think in terms of what is the company, what is the borrower doing in terms of information flow. You'll also want to look at the policy to identify the training requirements for employees. You'll want to make sure that training includes the social engineering, those phishing emails that I showed you. Sometimes training will also include clean desk policies, nothing left on the desktop, even if you're just going to lunch. And then acceptable internet usage policies. What websites are people allowed to visit and interact with? You'll also want to review the policy to see who's responsible for policy reviews, who's responsible for education, who's responsible for update requirements and implementation plans. Looking at a company's IT security policy will give you a sense for whether the company has pulled something off the internet and just filled in the names, or whether that company is really embracing the need for cybersecurity. The guidelines that an IT policy should include would be the timing and frequency of antivirus scans, firewall requirements, training, email filters, operating system upgrades and security patches, and two-factor authentication. These are terms that you'll probably see as you review a policy. And again, they can give you a view into how seriously the company that you're looking at takes cybersecurity. Moving past the security policy, the IT security policy, let's talk about the disaster recovery plan. A disaster recovery plan is a plan that contains the detailed instructions for responding to natural disasters, power outages, telephone system outages, as well as cyber attacks. So a disaster recovery plan is not only important from a cyber attack perspective, but it's also important for these other impacts that a business can feel. And some of those impacts, like a power outage or a telephone system outage, can be the result of some other company that has experienced a cyber attack. What you want to do with a disaster recovery plan is develop it, but then most importantly, test it. A company that actually goes through and tries to bring itself back online after it's using its backups, that's the company that you know will be able to more effectively recover from some kind of disaster. So a disaster recovery plan is great, but it has to be tested to ensure that it's well developed, and you have to frequently stress the plan by testing it bringing yourself back online on a regular basis. The industry statistics tell us that cyber attacks can be undetected for 200 days. And you think, why does that matter? Well, when you're thinking about a disaster recovery plan, you're assuming that the backups are going to be secure. But if you have a hacker in your system for almost a year, 2/3 of a year, you could end up with your backup information sets also being compromised. So we end up not only with the active data systems being impacted, but the backup systems being impacted. And that's why it is so important to make sure that you are stress testing your disaster recovery plan. When we're talking about backups of systems, the purpose of that backup is to restore the computer system, the operations of the business, in the event there's some kind of a hardware failure, software failure, physical disaster, human error. Now, sometimes that's one full backup of a system, because the company only is using one system, but that's highly unlikely. Typically, you're going to need incremental backups, specific independent system backups, so that all of the management decision-making tools are brought back up online as quickly as possible. In the example that I gave you about the new cooperative, which was hacked on September 21st, just a few days ago, they were able to get back online going old school. They, when I say back online, I don't mean back on computer line, I mean back receiving grain and shipping grain. But they had to go all the way back to using paper tickets. That was part of their disaster recovery plan, but we're not used to dealing with that paper world. So you've got to make sure that that's a backup system that's stress tested to ensure that the information can be captured appropriately and the company pays for what it has rightfully received and doesn't pay for extra. When we're talking about system backups, we could be talking about on-site backups, off-site backups, or cloud-based backups. And when you're testing your system, you need to make sure that you can use all of these backups together to get a comprehensive recovery of data that's going to run the company. Remember that an untested backup process can't be relied on. You might as well not have it, because the company's going to be in an emergency or a stress situation, and you need to make sure that the people who have to perform the recovery have had an ability to test that recovery process in a practice environment. If a company has multiple computer systems, and most do, they've got one for the general ledger, maybe they have one for inventory management. Think about, do they have one for maintenance and repairs tracking on equipment? The backup of each of these systems has to be developed and tested. If you think about a system such as a maintenance and repairs tracking system, you may think, well, that maybe isn't as important. But remember that when you're appraising millions of dollars of equipment, people want to see the maintenance and repair logs. If all of a sudden that's eliminated and can't be recreated, you can impact the value of the equipment collateral. Now let's talk about cyber insurance. Now, the thing with cyber insurance policies is that they really are in their infancy from the perspective of standardizing coverage and addressing customer needs. When you think about buying car insurance for yourself or your business, you think about answering a few questions and you basically understand what the policy covers and what the goal is and what the cost is. It's not the same with cyber insurance. The marketplace is certainly expanding and more companies are entering the market, but companies really need to understand what these insurance policies cover and what the ongoing threats are. So some areas that can be covered by insurance could be data loss, data recovery, and data recreation, responsibility for lost or stolen customer information, what a company has to do to make it right with its customers. Another area could be business interruption or loss of revenue. A company could experience loss of funds either through wire fraud, ACH fraud, or social engineering attacks. And it could be computer fraud. And some insurances also cover extortion and ransoms, including negotiation. So it's important to consider all the insurances that a company carries. Companies typically have director and officer insurance, business interruption insurance, E&O insurance, property and casualty insurance. And some of those policies sound like they'll cover part of the cyber insurance needs, but they're really not sufficient when you're considering proper risk management in a cyber security world. Some of the things that might be surprising at their cost would be, what happens if a hacker exposes or steals customer or business partner information? You're going to have notification costs. You're going to have to offer credit monitoring for victims. And you're going to have to consider the risk of civil damages, which would be a class action suit that those are actively pursued by class action lawyers. So there are costs to a cyber attack that you may not even realize exist. And within notification costs, that means you have to oftentimes bring experts in to identify what the universe of the potential victims would be. And you have to conduct an internal investigation to understand how it happened and build blocks so it can't happen again or minimize the risk of it happening again. And you have to provide notification. So cyber attack, the impacts of it can be costly and they live past the actual attack. When you're talking about computer forensics, many times you have to pay IT consultants who are honestly right now in very short supply, who have to work with the counsel that you have and the insurance company you have to determine whether a breach has occurred and put together methods to contain the breach and prevent further damage. And you also have issues with reputational damage. Probably, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, when Target was hacked and Home Depot was hacked, I made the mistake of buying something with a credit card at both of those stores around the time they were hacked. So I had to receive notification and, credit monitoring services. And what do I remember? Every single time I would get a notice, I remember, oh yeah, that's because I was silly enough to buy something with my credit card at Target, or I was silly enough to buy something with my credit card at Home Depot. So that's a reputational damage that I'm giving you a very simple example, but imagine how large that damage could be. You want to understand the resources that an insurance carrier is going to provide. Some insurance policies provide resources to design and develop programs, and that's something that can be part of a policy. But there are some items, some important assets of a business's performance that aren't necessarily covered by cyber insurance. So intellectual property theft needs to be covered by a specific intellectual property insurance policy. And lost future profits are typically not covered under cyber insurance. So you can see that you need a combination of insurances. You need a comprehensive insurance risk management policy to ensure that all of the insurances, sorry about that, all come together to really protect the operations of the company. The social engineering attacks that I described with the clicking on the email and the clicking on the attachments, those may not be covered under a typical cyber policy. So you need to make sure that social engineering is covered in a cyber insurance policy. And one thing that's interesting also about cyber policies is they typically do not cover acts of war, which could be an attack by an agent of a foreign power. And that's why some of the discussions that we heard with the Colonial Pipeline and the JBL, there was a little bit of a dance on whether or not we were talking about an attack by an agent of Russia or an attack by an independent group. Before we move off of insurance, one other thing I want to mention is I've actually gone through the process of having to put in place a cyber insurance policy for a company that was on the healthcare, in the healthcare industry. And one thing I learned from that is the cost of that cyber insurance policy is directly related to the company's IT security plan and policy and all the other things that we talked about. In other words, the amount of the policy cost is reduced by the things that a company can show that it's doing to protect itself: a disaster recovery plan, system backups, frequency of bringing the company back online, IT security policy, testing to make sure that employees are changing passwords, etc. So we actually had to go through an audit of our cybersecurity before we could have a cybersecurity policy put in place. And so you'll want to make sure that when you're thinking about working with companies, that you're aware of that. So what does all this talk about cybersecurity mean? Because none of us are experts on cybersecurity. We're not the ones that are going to build the fancy systems and protect the data, but we're the ones that have to deal with what happens after something occurs. So the recent cyber attacks have really underscored the need for all businesses to evaluate their risk management process, especially when it comes to their data. The evaluation of a company's approach to IT risk management is just as important as evaluating its financial performance, because if you don't have a well-developed IT risk management strategy, the company's financial performance can be brought to its knees. So, you're used to asking companies questions about the insurance coverage it carries, maybe for business interruption, for property and casualty, for equipment, for inventory, those kinds of things. I think you need to add asking about their approach to cybersecurity insurance and use that in your checklist of questions that you ask both current and potential customers. I want to give you a few examples of some cyber attacks so that you can understand the breadth and the far-reaching nature of these attacks. So in December of 2020, Revil, which is a Russian hacking group, they targeted sensitive and intimate photos of a cosmetic surgery clinic. And then they threatened to go to each of those patients. And if the patients didn't pay ransoms, the attackers were going to release the pictures. Now, the company paid a ransom in this case, but think of how much undermining of confidence in that surgery center the patients would have felt. There was a July 2nd attack that had a trickle-down impact on about 1,500 businesses, including the restaurant at the community that I live in. And this is an example of where the attack hits a different company, but the problem trickles down to a different company. In the case that I'm describing with the restaurant in our community, they had to shut down for 36 hours. And that isn't good for profits, right? There was also a medical practice in Miramar, Florida that was hacked, and its patients also received ransom demands that said that private medical data was going to be released by X date if certain amounts weren't paid. A couple other examples, a small town. So it's not just businesses. A small town in New York was hacked and had to pay $400,000 in cryptocurrency to unlock its computer system. A synagogue in New Jersey paid a $500,000 ransom to unlock its data. And a large New York law firm was hacked in May of 2020, and the hackers threatened to expose 1 terabyte of private celebrity data unless a cryptocurrency ransom was paid. So it's service industries, it's manufacturing companies, it's cooperatives, it's towns, it's churches. The cyber attackers are very creative, and they understand that they can go after a lot of different businesses and a lot of different entities and line their pockets with cryptocurrency. Every business is at risk for a cyber attack. The careful planning and testing is critical to survival, as is appropriate insurance coverage. Business stakeholders, whether you're talking about owners, shareholders, lenders, stakeholders need to add cybersecurity management to their lengthening list of risks that they have to be concerned about. So with that, this presentation is going to come to a close. I just want to mention a few things to you. If you go to the FocusMG website, focusmg.com, and you go to the Insights section, which is at the top towards the right, and you click on that, you'll find a variety of articles on different industries and different current challenges, labor shortages, cybersecurity, working capital management, cash flow. Please feel free to use that Insights page as a source for information when you're thinking about how to evaluate the performance of a business. And please call us anytime you would like to talk about a situation with us. We'll give you all of our phone numbers. You can find them on our website. They're also part of this deck. And if you email us at info@focusmg.com, info@focusmg.com, and ask for a copy of this deck, we're happy to provide it to you. But please feel free, call any one of us anytime there's something that you would like to discuss about the cybersecurity issues or any other emerging trend that is of concern to you. Thanks for joining us today.